this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. I don't know about all the rest of the rural areas around the country, but I do know about the South. In the South, you live out in a rural area. You don't really have an access to a dumpster. Most people, and I'm thinking back to my grandparents right now, had oil drums in their yard, and they'd put their household trash in it and light it on fire. That was one of the great treats of my life when I was little, that my grandmother would let me help her do that. And then, of course, in the rural areas, you have big burn piles as well, where you'll take brush that you've cut away, maybe along your fence line or fallen trees or whatever the case might be, and you don't do it. You don't do it every single day. You wait till it accumulates. That is the brush. The trash you burn regularly. But, sometimes those brush piles actually turn into gathering areas because it's essentially a gigantic bonfire. It's a place for many that has great memories. People sitting around singing. Maybe somebody's got a guitar. Maybe somebody's drinking beer and laughing and joking and carrying on. But every now and then, there will be an event that happens on a family's property that is beyond the pale of anything that we can imagine. And today is a day that we're going to talk about one such case that not many people have heard of. It's a case that originates in our home state of Alabama. And it's got everybody talking around these parts. And maybe after you hear this, you want to do your own research. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, you ever had an oil drum you burn trash in? You ever done that before?
I'm from the South, but it's Southern California, so no.
I knew that was coming.
Very quickly, just so we are all clear here.
Yeah,
I know what one is.
Yeah.
And I know what a burn pile is.
Yeah.
But I also know what it was like as a child for getting in trouble for building a fire in the backyard when my brother and I were trying to roast marshmallows. So, yeah, it's funny how things change. I love living in different parts of the great country because things that are normal where we live now are people think you're making it up. When this story first broke, it was brought to me by my wife. She said, Dave, have you heard about this car wreck? Because it was a car wreck that a dad died, a 2-year-old girl died, his daughter, and his wife was in critical condition.
Yeah.
And I think it happened on a Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And my first thought was, what happened? And looking at what happened, I was like, well, they're speeding. First of all, high rate of speed.
Estimated 92 miles per hour in a 45 mile per hour zone, going straight down a curve.
What dad does that? What kind of adult father puts his children in that kind of risk? Oh, but let's add another one to it, Joe, because Ryleigh Collins, the 2-year-old daughter of Stephen Collins and Pam Bailey, she wasn't buckled in anywhere. So you're driving 90 miles an hour in a 45 mile an hour zone going into a curve, and your daughter, your 2-year-old daughter, isn't buckled in.
Yep.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah, ain't that awesome? And just so people understand that we've had this case for us, I'll put it to you this way. The reason I wanted to talk about this case is that I rarely get asked by local television channels to do stuff. And it's not that I don't want to. I love people at local stations because they don't have the same sensibilities necessarily that, the big boys do. Their view is focused on local matters. And I enjoy helping out, but I had 2 call me from Birmingham in the last 2 days. Can you comment on this case? And I'm thinking, wow, I'll be glad to. And I really didn't know much about it. As a matter of fact, I knew nothing about it until I guess 4 days ago. And you said that you had known about it. LaDonna had passed that on to you.
Yeah.
And this is back in December when the MVA took place.
Mm-hmm.
But Dave, this case goes back further than December.
It was actually in the car wreck that killed Stephen Collins, the father, and Ryleigh Collins, the 2-year-old daughter. And the mother here, Pam Bailey, she was critically injured. They did not expect her to live. And so what happened is you're identifying the people involved and you're going, wait a minute, we have the mom, we have the dad. They've got 2 children. We can only find one. So they were looking, around the crash site for this 1-year-old toddler, this little baby, they're missing a child. And it was from that accident they went, wait a minute, there's no baby here. There's no sign of another child being in this car. And that's when they went, that's when the investigation began. And they found out the baby had been missing since September.
Yeah. And so we're up to December now when the wreck takes place. And back to the accident, I think that this is something that folks need to understand that, first off, the mother was restrained. She was belted in the vehicle. The father, who was unrestrained, the operator of the vehicle, he was ejected, and the 2-year-old was ejected, and she was in the back seat, and so she was thrown out of the vehicle. And of course, they both wound up with massive blunt force trauma, which is the primary cause of death in just about every motor vehicle accident I've ever worked. And it's the number one cause of death relative to motor vehicle accidents. And it kind of makes sense. It's like you're in a tumble dryer, and you're getting thrown about multiple points of impact. And no number of bag deployments are going to save your life if you're traveling at that rate and you're unrestrained. So, and I was kind of reflecting on this, Dave, when they have this kind of epiphanal moment where at the scene where they know that there is a baby that is attached to this family that's not there, who is 1, by the way. I can only imagine the police, because this is the way cops are, and firefighters too, about children. They probably said, look, we're going back out here. We're scouring because you never know. Car accidents are so violent and it's so dynamic. You never know where anybody is going to be launched to, where they're going to land at. And for a 1-year-old, very tiny, they could have wound up anywhere. You have no idea. I've seen some of the most bizarre things in the world in motor vehicle accidents, and we can do an entire show on that sometimes. But how is it? I think the question I have is that how is it that they came to understand that the child was missing? That's what I can't really feature here.
Now, here's your investigation. You've got a dead 40-year-old father, dead 2-year-old daughter. Wife is in the hospital in critical condition. When they started peeling back the family dynamic, they found out that John Elton Bailey, that would be Pam Bailey's father. By the way, her name is Wendy Bailey, but her middle name is Pamela. She goes by Pam Bailey. Okay. So Pam's father, John Elton Bailey, who is 55 years old, he actually had legal guardianship of Khaleb.
And of course, classic line coming up here in 3, 2, 1. They were already on the radar of Family and Children Services. You know, as you can imagine, what a shock, huh? And when I reveal to you in this episode what has been done, you're going to sit back and I'm not going to say you can't take the measure of it, because Lord knows some of the stuff we talk about, but you're really going to be scratching your head over this, because it's absolutely ghastly. And what a devastating blow, in that little community, because we're talking about so just kind of a quick geography lesson here. Fayette County, Alabama is northwest of Birmingham. And if everybody's familiar with Bama, the University of Alabama, it's almost directly due north of Tuscaloosa, where the University of Alabama is. It's rural. Okay. It's very rural. It's sparsely populated. I've got a couple of really good friends that are from Fayette, Alabama, which I believe is the county seat. And they, go on and on about their home there because it's so peaceful out in the country, beautiful, lush, kind of rolling land up there. You're still in that kind of Cumberland Plateau, Appalachian foothill kind of scenery, as you're headed north. And to have this kind of devastation happen in that little community up there would shock the conscience. And when we find out about Khaleb, you can imagine the community up there was wondering, where's this child? This child's part of this area up here. We want to know what happened to him. And no one had seen or heard anything about him. All they knew is that these 3 adults had custody over 2 children. And for whatever reason, they couldn't take care of them. Well, where's the first place you're going to look for a missing child? If you determined that as a result of this motor vehicle accident, this baby, Khaleb, is nowhere to be found. He's 1 year old. Guess what? You're going to go to the home. And this property is kind of an odd mishmash, if you will. There's a lot of drone footage of this place. And a couple of outbuildings, that sort of thing. And you can actually see where there are what appears to be, I don't want to call it piles of garbage, but there are areas where things have been deposited back there. It's hard to really make sense of it. But, Dave, the police went out to this location on several occasions, did multiple searches, and never could find Khaleb.
But once they get to the house and talk to Granddad, John Elton Bailey, he says, I don't know where he is. I hadn't seen him in a couple months. I don't know where that little boy is. So he gets charged right away. They charge him with failure to report a child missing. So now the story has broken. You've got this horrible car crash. Mom's in critical condition. The other 2 are dead. And Grandpa's now in jail on $100,000 bond because this child didn't go missing yesterday. This child's been missing for a while. And that's after they researched it some more. On December 17th, they issued the emergency alert, the BOLO, or not a BOLO, but the Amber Alert.
Amber Alert, yeah.
Or whatever alert we give nowadays on that, because they didn't really know what to go on. There really wasn't anything other than what they were being told by family that said, I don't know where he is. I mean, how do you answer that question? I guess, Joe, one of the things that you and I and actually we all immediately think of our own children when a child is, and we think, what have I ever been where I didn't know where my child was for more than a minute, and to think that you could actually answer that you could wake up in the morning knowing that a child, a 1 year old child you are responsible for, that you could actually go to bed tonight not knowing where that child is. I can't even identify with that.
I can't either. And, and this isn't a matter of, everybody does things differently. It takes minimal effort to just attain the baseline of care, warm, clean clothes, clean baby, significant food. Now, some people don't believe in holding their kids. I'd still hold my kids today if I could, but that's not what everybody does. But just those basics that, are kind of required of us as civilized human beings. And we have 3 adults that miserably failed, apparently, at that one simple task. And, it's demonstrated to me that even further by the fact that they didn't have this 2-year-old restrained in the vehicle and he's driving so recklessly. I got to tell you one other thing in light of everything that has kind of come about in this case. Have you thought, has it crossed your mind, Dave, that maybe him operating that vehicle the way he was, that was a suicide attempt?
No, I hadn't thought about that.
It's something that had come to mind for me because, why in the world would you be operating a motor vehicle at that speed and you've got the mother of your children in the vehicle with you and you've got an unrestrained child in the back seat? Did the dad know something? And was he aware that, there was going to be a bad moon rising for him in maybe a matter of weeks, because you can't keep this covered up forever. And so de facto, we're going to end everything by doing this. Now, maybe that's far-fetched. I have, however, had people that have committed suicide with their vehicle by running it into fixed objects. That's a thing that does happen. To me, maybe it wasn't intentional, but you're living your life in such a reckless manner in the absence of this 1-year-old, because, you've had, let's see, September, October, November, you've had 3 months to kind of stew over this whole thing this entire time, where the child has gone missing. Somebody's going to be looking for him. They're going to come back to you. And then, I don't know, maybe guilt weighs heavy based upon what was done potentially, from what I'm hearing, to this child prior to the disappearance, Dave. Because I got to tell you, out of a lot of the cases we cover, I've used, I don't know, I don't want to, continue to overuse this word, but what we're going to be talking about in just a few moments here has echoes of sadism, because of what was allegedly done to this 1-year-old. But when the police got out there initially, they couldn't find anything, Dave, and they went all over the property. Looking at the drone footage, I can actually see where they've dug holes, and they're, these kind of, they're not like trenches or anything. They're kind of circular in appearance. They're searching over the area. I would imagine that they may have suspected that there was a burial in the backyard. That's the only reason I can think of them turning earth back there.
I'm thinking about the J.J. Tiley case when they were out on that property,
Yep.
They were looking in a very specific area. We had basically 2 areas that they had figured out where these bodies were.
Yeah.
And in this case, they've got the whole area to go look at. I got a feeling that there's going to be a number of other objects out there that they've probably tried to hide, Yeah,
I would think so. And going back to the Daybell, the Daybell cases rather, I never know what surname to call anybody by, and that whole thing is so ridiculous and so horrible. But I think about, Tiley out there and what they did with her remains. And she was found adjacent to a ring. And I still remember actually the day that I was shown those aerial photographs from that scene, from Chad Daybell's home. And this is before I got to see the first images, before the authorities moved the logs. And it was set up, Dave. It looked like something from a Boy Scout encampment. There were logs that were laid out in a perfect circle, like you would sit on and, picking the guitar, having a bonfire and all that sort of thing. And all that stuff in later images had been moved. And of course, with her remains, it was a very half-hearted effort. It was horrific, but half-hearted effort to try to render her down. And they failed miserably because there was still a significant amount of her body that was left behind. But, the police are, with the case in Fayette County, Alabama, they're looking everywhere and they're not getting a hit. They can't see anything out there.
Okay, but what's going to be the difference between what you're looking for with a 17-year-old body versus a 1-year-old?
Oh, it's very, very simple.
We don't break down the same way. I know there's a lot less of a 1-year-old at 35 pounds, but
right.
I mean, there's more to it than just that, right? I mean,
yeah, there is. And, one of the big things is that let's just start off very basically talking about skeletal structure. When you're 1, you haven't had like bone fusions that have taken place, that sort of thing. Do you know that babies are actually, toddlers, they have more bones than adults do because fusion hasn't taken place. Well, fusion can, particularly at that age, can take place. The bones still have to be soft and malleable. Okay. Therefore, if they are exposed to, say, thermal injuries for a protracted period of time, they're broken down very, very easily. And with an adult where you have this kind of, the bones have ossified at this point in time, they're much more resilient. It takes a much longer time to render them down. We've covered several cases involving cremains, as they're referred to. It takes a lot of tending of the fire. It's not, I'd said in one interview, I think it was yesterday, where I think a lot of people labor under this idea that you're going to take a gallon of gasoline and pour it over the subject and strike a match and walk away.
Joe, I used to think that.
Yeah, and that's not the case, because gasoline is not fuel. We think of fuel for a car. Gasoline. Sorry. 3, 2. Gasoline, kerosene, fuel oil, they're accelerants, okay? And you can get something started, obviously, if you've ever foolishly had a puddle of gas and you struck a match and you threw it in, you see how that happens. It kind of flashes over, and certainly the more gas you have, you're going to have an explosion. But it doesn't burn forever and ever, amen, okay? You have to source it with wood. For instance, you think about Tara Grinstead over in Georgia. She was in the middle of her remains were like in the middle of a pecan orchard. And when her body was rendered down, that fire was tended for a long period of time using pecan wood, which, by the way, I found out, this is kind of an interesting little aside, there's a scale that's out there that I discovered where you can, it measures the BTUs, which is the measurement of heat, relative to the species of wood. And did you know that hickory and pecan are like at the top? And I didn't realize that hickory and pecan are very close relatives. And so they burn incredibly hot, okay? Whereas you have other woods that, like if you try to burn pine, for instance, it's not the best idea. Sometimes you have to do it. It's real smoky, a lot of sap, that gummy, stuff that comes out of it. So these fires have to be tended if you're looking to render down a body. However, when you're talking about a 1-year-old, let that sink in just for a moment. A 1-year-old, 12 months, they've been on this earth. A 1-year-old. It doesn't take much. It just takes somebody that's cold-hearted and doesn't care. There was a reporter in Birmingham that attended a press conference that was held by the sheriff's office there in Fayette County, Alabama. And the reporter ask the sheriff, because the sheriff said that they had found remains in a burn pile on this property. And he said the only thing he has said so far is that they were human remains. And the reporter asked, she said, could I recognize these as human remains? And the sheriff shook his head and said, no, you couldn't. What they have that remains at that scene, first off, was recovered by a anthropologist that they brought out there, which I recommend highly. Anybody that is looking to recover remains, this is not something that should be taken lightly. You need to have access to a forensic anthropologist, hopefully one that's fully trained up. And in this case, obviously they had one, because when you go into a burn pile, Dave, and you begin to look at everything that's there, it all looks the same. I mean, just think about it. All of our friends out there, if you're ever around an area where you have you've had a bonfire and all of the wood is rendered down there, even if you've thrown like a plastic bottle in there or maybe a metal bottle cap, if it's allowed to burn long enough, everything looks the same. But I got to tell you, Dave, not to the eye of an anthropologist. Okay,
now, Joe, we're talking about the body of a 1-year-old child, and I looked this up to see what the description was when, of size, approximately 35 pounds. They started looking for him in December, where he'd already been gone for a couple of months. We're not even sure exactly when. Just go back to September and let's just, say 3 months. And if he was I hate to even say it, I feel evil for talking like this, but if the baby had died, okay, let's just say the baby died from the flu, he died in the middle of the night, crib death, whatever, and they panicked and got up and they wrapped him in a towel and they took him outside and didn't know what to do, afraid because of their past legal happenings that they'd be accused of wrongdoing. So they just took this child and just left him out and, put him out the outside. How quickly would a 35-pound baby like that, a 1-year-old, decompose?
Very quickly.
If they're not left up to anything
very
else.
Very quickly. We're talking September. That's still the height of summer here. Everybody thinks September, that it's fall. Not in Alabama. It's not. Not in Alabama. It's not. It's brutal. September is actually generally more miserable than July is as far as heat and humidity goes. So in answer to your question, if you had similar remains that would be left out in the open like that, first off, decomposition would start very, very quickly. But you have a window there where you would be able to still recognize the remains, provided you're not dealing with scavengers. And of course, in Alabama, you're always dealing with scavengers. But in a perfect scenario, like you're talking about, where the remains remain unmolested by any kind of scavenger that's out there, it's just subject to the environmental conditions. Body's going to break down relatively quickly. You will not, I would imagine, within probably probably mid to late October, you might just be dealing with a skeleton, if you could still find the skeleton at that point in time. There would be some remnant there. And again, it's impossible not to factor in scavenger activity, in an environment like that.
But what about the skeleton? Would the skeleton, because it's not a full-grown adult skeleton, but will those bones break down as well?
Yeah, because they're very soft. It's kind of, I'm sure that there's probably archaeologists out there that would take exception to what I'm about to say. I like to read a lot about archaeology and discovery of remains from antiquity, those that have been recovered. It's very, very rare that the remains of infants or young children are ever recovered from ancient ancient digs, you'll find skeletons, of adults. But again, those skeletons have formed. They've gone through this maturation process to that point. Little ones are so very fragile. And, people always talk about how resilient, a child can fall and bounce right back. They might cry a little bit, but if you and I took the same tumble as to what little kids might do, we're going to be convalescing in our bed for a couple of days. All right. If not on ICU in my case. So, but for little kids though, they can bounce right back, but they're not as resilient when subjected to when their body, okay, we're not talking about living children now, when their little bodies are subjected to the elements like that. And then you add in an added layer of fire, that thermal dynamic that comes in, and the bodies begin to get to the point where they're unrecognizable. And again, if this child, because to this point, full disclosure here, as of this taping right now, Dave, we still don't have a positive ID on this precious little baby. And I call him baby, he's 1 year old. We don't have an ID on him. And I think that I have an idea as to why it's taking so long. But we do know that we have human remains. And the anthropologist was able to retrieve those remains. And just because you retrieve remains at a scene like this, that's not the end of the job, because now actually the real work begins, because there's two key areas here, Dave, that you have to look at scientifically. First off, who is this? Okay. Now I know people are saying, come on, Morgan, how many other 1 year olds are missing? I can't just assume that. You know what they say about assume? You never assume that at all. You have to scientifically verify who these remains are. Well, the real task here, Dave, is going to be able to find tissue that is still viable. And that's for retrieval of DNA. That's the only way you're going to get this baby's body, identified. There are going to be no food.
You can't do it with bone. With any bone pieces. Yeah, all right, but there's bone pieces. Is there no DNA in bone?
Yeah. There's DNA fragments there, but these bones are very, very soft. I don't know how intact they are. I think my default position is going to be teeth, because these are still the child at 1 has what are referred to as deciduous teeth. It's the same thing. It's the same thing as the old terms, baby teeth, and there's an even older term called milk teeth. And the older generation used those terms. But yeah, so the deciduous teeth. Deciduous means it's something that's sitting on top. They're not permanent, but they're kind of they're closed off. And of course, teeth are not bone. And if you can find a tooth that's intact, that hasn't fractured as a result of being exposed to heat, and there's high probability you can. Teeth are very resilient. You would drill down into the teeth and into the pulp, and this takes quite a bit of skill, and extract that pulp sample from there. Now, what are you going to compare it to? Well, dad's dead. All right. Sister's dead. Well, who remains? Well, mama remains. So you would go and do a buccal mucosal swab, retrieve the cells out of her on the sides of her cheek there. And some people call it a swab or scraping. It's more like a scraping. You get that sample, and then you do a DNA profile on her, and that DNA, which is unknown at this point in time, or the term that's used in forensics, it's called questioned sample. You would compare the two to see if you get a hit. And that's really the way I think that they're going to have to get this child's body identified, all right, to make sure that is Khaleb's remains that are there.
Now, it's one thing for somebody just to hourly say, they found the toddler in the burn pile on the property. Come on, Morgan, it's got to be this kid. AL.com is actually running a story saying the remains of an Alabama toddler missing and presumed dead since last year were found in a burn pile. Hasn't been confirmed. That's what they're saying. And this goes back to something you and I talked about the other day.
What's that?
The media. Yeah. The media not knowing how to do its job. You and I have done, and you did a great lesson on this with manner, cause, mechanic, death. And it was, I didn't know a lot of it. I know enough of what I've learned from you. But when I hear somebody in the media say the wrong thing, they don't know what they're talking about. And it's really disingenuous to pretend you are a journalist if you're going to get facts wrong. And the fact is that child has not been identified yet.
The child has not. And you can make a comment like, and this is something we would say scientifically. If we've been able to do our measurements, we can say that these remains are consistent with the remains of a 1-year-old child. But we haven't even hit that point yet. Okay, where that's been publicly stated, but you still cannot at the time that we're speaking right now, Dave. You still cannot affirmatively say that, and that's very dangerous because there are cases out there where, and I've been a part of them, where bodies are misidentified. And listen, I got to tell you, not saying this about this family, but if there was a similar family and they had such careless disregard for their own children, who's to say that this hadn't happened to other children? I have no idea about that, but it's something that if you're an investigator, you cannot just assume that this is Khaleb's remains. You have to go the full length in order to bring this home. You're going to want that, and the court is going to require it of you because there have been charges leveled in this case both at the mother and at the grandpa. But one of the most chilling parts to this story, Dave, is the fact that according to what the police are saying, this Stephen Collins, who is Khaleb's dad, okay, apparently what he had been doing was that this is I mentioned the whole thing about a touch of sadism here. Apparently, according to reports, Stephen Collins has been accused in, how I told you that DFACS or Department of Family and Children's Services has gotten involved. There are court documents that exist that speak to treatment of Khaleb. They talk about, and this is a phraseology, and I quote, physically abused by torturous remain. Strike that, Dave. In 3, 2. This is a statement, and I quote, physically abused by torturous means, end quote. And how was he tortured? Well, apparently what was happening is that this 1-year-old was being bound by Stephen Collins, allegedly, with rope and beaten. That's in life. That's what these court documents allege. And he's also accused of, in same court documents, of sending graphic text messages to Wendy Bailey. And in those text messages, he threatened to kill this precious angel. And to just kind of drive this point home, Dave, Stephen Collins allegedly sent photos to her of the abuse. Let that sink in just for a second, okay? Let that drip down into your groundwater, everybody, of what this guy was about, allegedly. Because it's an absolute horror show. I'd like to know what was going on with the 2-year-old as well. And because I don't really understand, first off, if this is in court documents, I got questions. Why is this baby still in the house? Well, who was named custodian? Grandpa was. Guess who was all living under the same roof together? All three of these adults, Grandpa, Mama, and the Stephen Collins guy. They're all living together. But yet Collins is alleged to have done this to Khaleb. I have questions about this court filing because apparently this is known. This is something that's known outside the circle of these individuals in this home. Well, who allowed this? Who is or was not making visits to this home? If this baby was being treated this way, and I got to tell you, I'm really going to hate the moment, and I hope it doesn't come, that I find out that anybody outside this family has possession of those photographs. Somebody in a position of authority, because it's horrible, horrible stuff. If any of this stuff is true, again, this is all speculative at this point in time, but I can tell you this. I know, speaking for my buddy Dave, we're going to keep an eye on this case. We're going to watch this all the way through because I'm vested now. I want to try to understand what happened to Khaleb. I want to understand how he died. I don't think I'll ever know the why behind it. You never can know. I don't really care about these other people, but on body bags, the people that we advocate for and care for are the dead. It's the people that didn't have a voice when they were alive, like little Khaleb, and they sure don't have a voice after they're dead. But if it, if it brings me to my knees, I'm going to speak up for Khaleb, and we're going to talk about him some more. We'll find out more information, and hopefully in a future episode, we'll be getting back to you real soon. And maybe we can offer an update once there's been a decision about, first off, who these remains belong to. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.